What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackballed. Listen, I've had a very strange day today. For the second time in like 5 years, my phone was on vibrate, and I kept on hearing this sound. And I'm looking around my house, and I'm trying to find my phone. Obviously, it's on some sort of surface, and obviously someone's trying to get a hold of me. Couldn't find it. All of a sudden, all I hear again in like 5 minutes is, where the fuck is my phone? So then I find my phone, and I'm holding onto it, and I'm looking, and I'm like, no one's called. And while I'm holding the phone, all I hear is, It was a cow from across the street. That's right. I thought a cow was my cell phone. So I'm like, I need to improve this day. I need to get as far away from the vibrating cow as possible. And I need to figure out what I'm going to do tonight. And so I decided that I wanted to have one of those shows. And there's a few people that I put in this slot where I have a show where I'm like, oh, this is so comfortable. I don't have to prepare all that much because I know this person. I know what I like to talk about with this person. I have other guests that are like that. Spenny, for example. I don't prepare when it's Spenny because we have such a really good rapport. So on that note, I would like to present my guest for today, and her name is Caryma Sa'd. Caryma, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm trying not to go crazy because of the vibrating phone thing.
Was the cow okay? What was its
He was just mooing.
Okay.
He was okay. He was sitting around, just looked up at me, chewing his caw and mooing. So it was weird. How are you? I haven't spoken to you in a while.
I'm good. I'm good.
One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, other than the fact that I don't have to prepare much because I know what we want to talk about, but I was saying to you on the phone earlier today that in the culture wars that a lot of people call it, most people pick a side. And there's good reason for that. People have principles or people have hang-ups or whatever, and they feel that one side is more appropriate to join than the other. I feel like we're kind of more like spectators watching the culture war kind of unfold in front of us. And so I wanted to start the show a little bit light and talk about Jonah Hill. That's how we're going to lead off the show today.
All right.
I know it's not something that I would normally talk about. I don't really talk about celebrity news all that much, if at all. When I'm on other people's shows, I sort of do. But I saw Jonah Hill trending for like 2 or 3 days, and finally I clicked it, and I'm just like, actually, I think I posted something the first day, but he kept on trending, and he posted, or he didn't post anything actually. He sent a private message, I guess, to his ex, and I guess she's a surfer. And her Instagram is, her in bathing suits and showing herself surfing. I think she's a surf instructor or something like that. And so, I'm like, okay, well, what did he say? So he said this. This is like a private message that she had published for some reason. And he wrote to his ex, I think they were together at the time, plain and simple. If you need surfing with men, boundaryless, inappropriate friendships with men, to model, to post pictures of yourself in a bathing suit, to post sexual pictures, friendships with women who are in unstable places, and from your wild recent past beyond getting a lunch or coffee or something respectful, I am not the right partner for you. If these things bring you to a place of happiness, I support it, and there will be no hard feelings. These are my boundaries for romantic partnership. My boundaries with you is based on the ways these actions have hurt our trust. The problem that I don't have a problem with any of this, actually. I actually don't care at all. But my breakup sounds like a lot worse than that, right? So, but it was one of those. The reason why I'm bringing it up even is because it was one of those issues that made people plant flags on their side of the culture war. One side was like, she doesn't sound like she's a decent human being at all. If she wants to engage in all that activity, I support Jonah. And the other side was like, he's a misogynist. And I was just kind of like, he sounds like a guy with self-esteem issues, probably because he's formerly like a chubby guy. I was formerly a chubby guy. I know what that's like. And also has trust issues. But then I was like, are his trust issues kind of confirmed by the fact that she published a private message from him like long after they broke up? and kind of trying to embarrass him like that. And so, anyways, I thought I'd start the show out really fluffy and ask you what you thought about that situation.
Well, I, like you, don't care, but it's been sort of on my feed.
Yeah.
So I suppose I've had kind of a vantage point where I'm watching people react to this. And it's almost like this is one of those ink blot tests, and
Hmm.
people see in it themselves and will project their own history onto just the text that we're seeing, right?
I did that. I swear
Right.
to
So
God.
that's
Yeah.
and that's a totally normal reaction, and very human of us, I think, to try and
Mhm.
relate things to our own circumstances. So I mean, I've heard different things along the lines of what you said. Um, on the one hand, people, particularly women, who have been pursued by typically men, and then sort of made to feel that they the way they are is not correct, and needs to change. And it's this whole idea of chasing after the wild bird so you can cage it, right? And so I think that there's people who saw that, and understandably so. I think that's a fairly common phenomenon in relationships, where the idea of boundaries or that language or kind of therapy talk is almost weaponized to the
Hmm.
point of, it's not actually a boundary, and you knew who I was going into this, so now how are you asking me to change? And then the flip side to that is, people's needs, they may not be immediately in touch with them, and it's fair to sort of put out expectations. And the way that this was phrased, we don't have a ton of context,
Hmm.
but as long as it's not manipulative, and so some people see manipulation in these words, others don't. I think it's interesting that this happens sort of 2 years, three, like right after the fact, right? It looked
Yeah.
like that was a message from 2021.
And she
So
said
that
she
then
waited. She said she waited to release it until his current wife or girlfriend, whatever she is, had her baby. And I'm just like, why is
that
that?
seems like a good reason to just not like it. Let's not pretend that this is out of concern for the current partner, right?
Right.
Because if it was, this would be a conversation behind closed doors, not one that is taking place on social media. So I think that's a bit disingenuous. From some of what I've perused, it sounds like maybe he moved on too quickly for her liking after they parted ways.
Hmm.
And there's a resentment there that built up. People want different things at different stages, and sometimes it just isn't meant to be. Yeah, I go back to my original point of I don't care. But having been at not at the same level, obviously, but at the center of people baselessly speculating on things, kind of in a pylon where people will project motives or intent that really has more to do with what's going on in their lives than what they are looking at or reacting to. I The whole thing makes me a bit uncomfortable, because there are real people in this, and
Hmm.
it's not the type of thing that is well suited to be parsed out on social media. Like
Publicly.
it's
Yeah.
just it's kind of gross. So I'm not like a huge fan of this. I don't think that the rationale of, well, I want to help people see red flags so they know what they need, like I don't really see that here, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm
But
with you on the ink blot part. Like it does feel like one of those litmus tests. Like you're gonna pick the right side for this. He's a misogynist, right? Isn't he? Isn't he? And it's just like, I don't know. I have no idea if he is or not. I do know what it's like. I'll try to be careful with my words here, but I do know what it's like to be the victim of a dishonest PR campaign by an ex. It's never happened to me before until this recent time, and when you find out what's being said, you're like gobsmacked. And to put if I put myself in the position of these two people, these two, I guess one's a celebrity and the other one isn't. It does feel really vindictive to just share something like that. I
Mhm.
don't know his context. You're right about the context too. The context could be anywhere from total controlling and manipulative to totally transparent and honest. It is really difficult to ascertain what's happening there. And that's why weaponizing it by making it public, I think, is so wrong and kind of nefarious. It did. You're so right. It did. It totally reminded me of my situation right now. That just the vindictiveness part of it, and that's. I think I posted something like, Jonah Hill's text sounds like he has trust issues and low self esteem, and then the publication of those texts by his ex makes me feel like he was right not to trust her. Right? That was kind of how I felt about it. But I wanted to start with that just because of the culture war stuff, because really that's what you specialize in, and not the taking the side part, but in the examination. You're one of my favorite public figures because I like the way that you show up at an event and just document it and then analyze it afterwards, or maybe or talk about it afterwards and comment on it afterwards. And if you criticize either side, the other side ends up piling on you, and it doesn't matter which side it is. And I feel like that's when you're doing something right. I want to pivot now to Joel Harden, because I find it interesting. Set this up. I'm about to show a clip with him in a megaphone, and I would like you to sort of like set up the story for me the way you did on the phone about where he was, what happened, and what do we think? What are we speculating about in regards to him?
Okay, so on June 9th in Ottawa, there was a fairly large protest that occurred outside three public schools on Broadview Avenue. And what spurred this was a man by the name of Billboard Chris Elston, who.
It sounds like he sounds like a guest on Lachlan's show, Billboard Chris. Yep.
He could be.
Yeah.
He very well could be. He had for the past decade or so has been touring across North America and beyond, I believe, talking about gender ideology, and he has some very strong views on a range of things, which some people find objectionable and other people agree with him. So that's kind of we're in
What
this.
side is he on?
He's on the side of children can't consent to puberty blockers, all the way up to kids shouldn't be exposed to gender ideology, which he terms fairly broadly, and so that means a whole bunch of different things to different people, and some construe it as being hateful. So he announces that he's showing up in Ottawa. He's going to be joined by a group called Save Canada, which is purportedly youth-led, and kind of on the same side of issues as him, and they are faced by counter-protesters who show up to oppose this messaging. And unlike most other events that I've personally covered, in this instance, there were two large groups. It wasn't overwhelmingly one group outnumbering the others, and so that kind of set the stage for tension, right? And depending on who you ask, very different perceptions of what was actually happening on the ground. And Joel Harden comes into this because on the same day, he posted a picture of himself with a cut on his cheek, and a caption that implied that he got punched in the face by a protester, and that he would take a punch for queer kids any day. Um,
Here, I'm just going to show that picture just because I think it's obviously relevant to what we're talking about. And the funny thing is about the picture is that when people look at it, he almost looks happy. You know, so here's the picture of Joel Harding. Again, he is the NDP MPP for Ottawa Centre, and this is the picture that he posted. So, just for those listening, it is just like a little nick underneath his eye, about an inch underneath his right eye. Okay, go ahead.
So people saw this, and people who were there kind of were like, "When did you get punched in the face? When did that happen?" And he provides an explanation to Yahoo News that's basically, I was breaking up a fight between two women, and then, I felt something, and then I got punched in the face, and it all happened so quickly.
Right.
But it didn't really add up. And I guess this is the lead in to the footage where my videographer happened to catch this. And it's basically Joel's megaphone hitting his face in basically the same spot as this injury.
Okay, let's show that. Does he actually have a rainbow Band-Aid over top of it?
He does. So there's also speculation that the cut that he has, that you showed in the previous picture, was already there, and this rainbow Band-Aid was placed over it to hide it. And it's just bad luck that he hits himself in exactly the same spot. I don't know.
Right.
And like the video cuts off because I slowed it down so you could see the megaphone making contact. On a podcast that I put out, I put a longer version of the video, so it's clear that nobody has shoved this megaphone into his face. When I initially released this short clip, the narrative changed from eyewitnesses who said, well, what we actually saw was Joel having this megaphone punched into his face. So the story shifted a little
Right.
bit.
Yeah.
Well, it's an extension of him, so why would I clarify that, it's the same thing as being punched in the face?
It's
Okay.
really not, though.
It's really not.
Can I just want to interject for a second? It feels like one of those situations where, and Joel Harding could be a rabid right winger, and the symptoms of just being so tunnel visioned would be the same, which is, oh, I'm here at something I'm being really vocal about. I'm going to make sure people knew I was here, and I'm going to make it a little bit about me, virtue signaling my love for this community that I'm trying to protect. And what makes me suspicious about people like him is that, and this is me speculating, there is often a vibe of the ends justify the means because you're on the right side of history. And I think we're suffering from a lot of that right now.
Yeah, a lot of self-righteousness where it's not really warranted because everyone's kind of fucked up, right?
Yeah.
So if we could just keep that in mind, and it applies to ourselves, to others, and just like chill. Everyone needs to chill. Anyway, so in response to this, like I said, some of the eyewitnesses changed their version of the story, shifted it slightly, or new people came out saying, well, that's what I saw. The megaphone punched his face. And then Joel put out a lengthier explanation, and he sort of doubled down on this idea that, there were two women, there was hair pulling going on. He gets in between them and he's holding the megaphone, and then the woman, hits it into his face. And that's what he meant by getting punched in the face. But the problem is that in this rally, there were hundreds of cameras out, right? And not everyone is recording every second. So it's totally conceivable and plausible that things did not get captured on video that actually took place. However, there was only one recorded hair pulling incident. And if you want to pull that up.
Yeah. Um, what did we just watch there? And I'll play it again after you tell me what we just watched.
So that the person in the blue cape is a counter protester. Moments before this interaction, she actually reached out with this rainbow pinwheel, hit the guy in the fox outfit, smacked the lady whose hair is being pulled. So it created this tussle. So it's first of all not at all what Joel Harden described as far as a protester being the one to instigate and agitate. She
It's hard
did
to tell
respond.
which side people are on in that clip. No
Well,
idea.
that's isn't that the
Hold
that's a
on, I'm gonna
metaphor
play.
for all of it.
I'm gonna play it again. I'm gonna pause it.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's just. Okay, the woman in the cape, is she like pro? I don't know, LGBTQ or anti? I can't tell.
Well, she's on the side of the quote unquote guardians or defenders of the children.
Okay,
So that's Dina Sharif, and she is very extra. And from her own live stream, again, you can tell that she's the one who instigated this encounter,
yeah.
and apparently got smacked in the face with a Bible by the woman whose hair she's pulling down
Haven't
here.
we all, in one way or another?
So that's what's happening in this clip. But the thing is, Joel Harden was wearing a rainbow blazer, and there's nobody in a rainbow blazer here. So I
He
have a
claimed
lot
that
of
he was
trouble.
there when all this happened.
I don't think he was.
But he claimed he was.
He claimed he was. Well, he claimed that he got between two women who were pulling hair. Mind you, there's only one woman pulling hair here, but there were no other documented hair pulling incidents. No one I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot of people on both sides of this divide, none of them saw another hair pulling incident. The guy with the megaphone here, that's Toby Whitfield. He's the executive director of Capital Pride, which, you know, they receive public funds and private donations to put on the Ottawa Pride Parade, like Pride activities. They've been partnered with some of the drag story time at the National Art Center. So he's like right in the thick of this, but Joel is nowhere to be seen. So it just like the fact that there was a megaphone supposedly hitting him that came out of nowhere, hair pulling, this contact with his face. Those three things did not happen simultaneously at the protest, as far as I can tell.
Right. And so I'm just playing it sort of in slow motion here. And who's the guy in the yellow?
That's Freedom Fox Guy, who is a protester. So he has shown up at different events across, I would say, pretty much Eastern Ontario. So Peterborough, Ottawa. And his shtick is that he wears a fox costume.
Listen, as a person who who's had his own struggles with mental health, I swear to God, I don't mean this in a flippant manner, but I feel like both sides are represented by people who have some serious problems.
Yeah, that's.
I
fair
mean,
to
we
say.
have furries and caped crusaders and you know, people that are really extra vocal. None of them can fight, obviously, right? Like they all sort of like just pile in. Like they look like basketball. You know how when basketball players fight, they're kind of like, you know, they don't really fight.
Limbs flailing kind of
Yeah,
uselessly.
I'm worried that we are one of the issues that we're kind of skimming over. Not me and you, but the royal you that or the royal we that we're skimming over is that the pandemic created or helped exacerbate existing mental health issues and
Mhm.
created a whole new sect of more mental health issues because I am not taken aback by any of these protests. I am not. I haven't yet to see, even if I believe in the issue, the representation of that issue, who's for that issue, those aren't people that I really want to align with. And that's why I feel more like a spectator. When you go out and you document these events, and thank you for doing that, by the way, because I'm glad somebody is taking a perspective that isn't just like pro or anti. Are you finding that it is becoming pretty clear that the people that are representing these sides have other things going on in their lives that maybe they need to deal with?
Yes, yes. I think that's a very accurate statement. Now, that's not to say that people who are genuinely interested in a particular cause don't themselves show up, right? And may not have these underlying or overt issues going on. But it's sort of off-putting, right? And I think from my observation, one of two things happens. Either people decide that it's distasteful and not for them, and they don't attend these types of events, or they find themselves being radicalized. And the radicalization happens largely online, but also in person, because there's like an element of trauma bonding to this. Because no matter which side of the divide you're on, you feel like you're under siege. And we can talk about like the human rights case for these guys versus those guys. Everyone is engaging in hyperbole, so you can't really rely on their assessments of each other. It's just, that's what it is. And I get a lot of flack for making false equivalencies between both sides or both sidesism. A lot of what I do is comment on tactics, right? So I don't, sometimes I will engage in the substance of an argument. But as far as tactics are concerned, I think everyone should be held to the same level of scrutiny, regardless of your cause. And, you know, that's, not everyone agrees with that. And some will take it as an affront to be critiqued or closely examined because they're on the right side. But I don't think that it's a net benefit to society if we start adopting the ends justify the means approach, because like the winds of politics, they can change very, very easily. So the more that we normalize bad behavior, you know, and it's going to be like a shocked Pikachu face when the same tactics are used against you, right?
Yeah, when you have, and I used to trick people when, you know, like a decade ago, because I've been writing about polarization for so fucking long. I'm tired of it on so many different levels, but I know that it's a problem that won't go away, and I don't know how to help get rid of it. But because I see it as the disease, and these sort of protest and counter protest and tactics and ends justify the means as the symptom of that disease. It becomes not a crusade, but like, or a mission even. But it's frustrating being the spectator because on certain issues, I want to now like not give a fuck about either position and just come up with solutions that sort of satisfy both sides, but have nothing to do with what they're representing. So just to give you an example of that, the trans women in bathroom issue. I don't think that we should be arguing about whether or not male-bodied people should be in women's bathrooms because neither side wants to budge on that. I think the solution to that is that from here on forward, every single public bathroom should just be a singular unit. And that way we don't have to share anything ever again. By the way, I would support that if trans people didn't even exist, I would support that because I don't understand why we have to make peeing and pooing a communal event. So really, so.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so you take the argument away from them, and you're like, listen, go back to your little play corners, and here's how we'll deal with this. We'll take away the argument. Now you guys don't have to fight about it. You know, and I think, And to me, that is, if we can find those kinds of solutions to these problems, like I have one for the drag story time thing. I don't care if drag queens, tell stories for kids. Just make sure, like, say they go to a school, and that school has within it a dress code for teachers and students. The person reading the story just has to adhere to whatever the dress code is in that school,
Mhm.
and then you guys don't have to fight about it anymore. I feel like people would both still attack you anyways. Like they'd be like, drag queens shouldn't be in talking to kids. That's the one side. The other side would be like, what kind of puritanical fucking, position is that? And it's just like, I don't know. I just don't want to hear you guys fucking bicker about it anymore. Like,
To your point, I think that kind of going back to basics, right? Like first principles, particularly like we have a whole human rights law framework that's actually very decent in Canada.
mm,
And it is equipped to address and resolve a lot of these issues. Um, there's a balancing act when it comes to competing rights. There's no hierarchy of human
mm,
rights, and there's a need to accommodate to the point of undue hardship. So all of those concepts, right? Like they have to be fleshed out based on specific facts. So I'm being a bit overly simplistic when I say, we just apply the framework because you can argue anything one way or the other. That's the whole nature of law, basically.
mm.
But if we can center ourselves on that, I think that it saves a lot of hassle and headache and politicization because ultimately, on this issue in particular, I think that it does a disservice to marginalized people to have ignorant ideas being spouted and amplified as if they have legitimacy on either end of this. And it the fear mongering that occurs that has some basis in reality to the extent that it makes the world less safe because there's clownish behavior and representatives who are distorting issues. So I like it's very frustrating to see and watch, and to say things like that and then be characterized as hateful or you know a rube for Trudeau, or like it's just those are all thought terminating tactics, right? It's like mental shortcuts that lead us to dead ends, and yet people insist on them because it's easy and they're lazy.
Yeah. It's that's really a good point because it's interesting. Sometimes you can cause a person's brain to basically collapse in on itself if you if you frame an issue with nuance and sort of factual information that runs against their narrative. And I'm not even going to look at the comments when I say this. I get tired of people like if I talk about anything that has to do with the trans issue. I like here we go. Oh, James up, blah, 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 blah. And I just actually consider those people part of the problem. But and even if they're regular viewers that are about to do it, sorry, but it's better to listen sometimes than to assume. In Canada, uh, right now, and for the last X amount of years, if you're a biological male, you can be sent to women's prisons if you identify as a woman. It happens. Um, I have a problem with that because I just don't think you should introduce penises to rape crisis centers and women's prisons and things like that because, you know, be- because biological males rape women. Like, and even saying that, I'm all hesitant because people are like transphobe when you say it, but it's just factual, right? But where you make their heads implode is when you tell them that disproportionately indigenous women are represented in prisons, like well disproportionately, like they make up like 50% or something like that of prisoners or something in this country. You add on top of that that the Canadian prisons don't keep statistics on trans women assaulting women in women's prisons because it is documented as female on female assault. So you can't even like ascertain through the data if there's a problem. And then the people that end up getting victimized, by and large, are Indigenous women. And if you try, I've tried to bring that up with gender activists before, not in a way that's like, "Rah, rah," but it's just like, actually, have you ever thought of maybe this angle of this issue? And they just dismiss it. They just get really angry. Like, can you show me the statistics that say that trans women assault women and females? I'm like, no, but the reason why is because they don't actually keep those statistics. And
So,
yeah.
so I think that like part of the pushback to that line of thinking is the idea that it presumes that trans women are have a higher propensity for such crimes, right? But the issue, in my view, is that if there aren't sufficient checks and balances, then it is something that a criminally minded person, because we're talking about criminals, um, is able to exploit and take advantage of, and sort of that's the problem. It's not in my mind
It's not a
that
trans issue.
trans women are inherently like that's not
No,
the
that
case,
and people
right?
never understand that. It's not a critique against trans people. It is say, and I've been saying this for so long that I'm almost tired of hearing myself say it. But that whole what you just said, that sometimes criminals will exploit loopholes in our system, right? That's what they do. That's what criminals fucking do. Whether it's welfare,
Yeah, I've worked with my fair share of criminals, and I that is the case, especially in a prison context,
yeah,
because prison sucks. So if you are able to make your situation marginally better by hook or by crook,
yeah.
and especially if you're in for a long time, that is something that is open to abuse. And so it's not that, and I think people also opine on this without actually having a lot of information, certainly without ever having stepped foot in a jail or a prison,
Mhm.
right? And so, you know, I invite folks to examine their own talking points, and give yourself room to think and grow. And that's not pushing anyone in one particular direction or another. Like my opinion, like it doesn't really matter what I think, but people who are very loud on their opinions on stuff, uh, the loudest people aren't always the most informed,
Yeah.
has been my general observation.
But Jen Waddell says, "Stop cis men from pretending to be trans to get into women's prisons," would be how I'd word it. Checks and balances. That's the exact argument that a lot of us have been making for a long time. It's not a trans issue. It's that cisgendered heterosexual men co-opt the trans identity in order to victimize women. And that to me is a pro trans argument, because what we're trying to do is rid the trans communities of fraudulent cisgendered heterosexual men who want to co opt it and make problems for everybody. That is such a reasonable argument, I think. Like it's just, and it's not difficult. I saw someone say, I glanced at a comment about 5 minutes ago, and someone saying, oh, it doesn't happen. It actually does. And it's really easy to find cases in the UK and in the United States, and even a couple in Canada where they actually reported on it, about male-bodied prisoners raping women in prisons. And then inevitably, if you see that argument through with somebody else, you'll get like, oh, well, trans women get raped in male prisons, as if the only choice you have.
Nobody should be raping
That's
anyone in
that's
prison,
right.
right?
That's
So that's like the real fundamental issue
correct.
here.
Yes.
Why do we have a system where that's even possible
Yeah.
or expected
Yeah.
to have happen, right? Because women also rape women in prison, but like sexual and guards rape women or
That's right.
men in prison. So there's all this like
But this male bodied,
assault.
but transferring a male bodied, and I'm sorry, I'm not saying trans women, because again, I am saying that often. And the Karen White case in the UK is probably the most famous case, but there's like dozens and dozens and dozens of these examples, of men who have been convicted of sexual violence against women, self IDing as a woman. The system just saying you must be infallible because you're talking about an issue that I'm afraid to disagree with you on. So go ahead to the women's prisons, and invariably someone ends up getting raped. So the policy of self ID is creating the Trojan horse for predatory cis men to then go exploit women in women's prisons and rape crisis centers and things like that. And you can't make that point. And I love it when people are like, it's such a small percentage. And it's just like, you created with that policy a new pool of raped women. And now you're like, the percentage is small because, again, one rape for me is too many. How many is too many for you? And then it becomes like, oh, you're transphobic and blah, blah, blah. It is so, it's such bullshit. And this is why people get so upset about this issue. It's not about hating trans people. It's about the infallibility complex for activists on this issue in particular is like, it goes like this. Nobody would ever lie about being trans. That's one thing that they believe. Trans women are women, and I'm really sorry, and I know I'm going to get hate mail for this. No, they're fucking not. They are trans women and women are two different categories that deserve the same set of rights, but they are decidedly different. It is an existential, abstract idea that XY and XX chromosome people are identical. It doesn't pass the biology test. It's a mental and emotional game, and it really does a lot of damage, because you can be allies with women and trans women and men and trans men, and you can think of them all as equal, but different. And I don't know why that turned into bigotry. And maybe you even disagree on it, but at least we can probably have a conversation about it, because I'm trying to explain it in a way where people understand that A, I'm clearly not a religious person. B, I know trans people exist. But C, I think I want to make sure that as many women don't get raped as possible by dealing with this issues and all the ancillary stuff that goes on because of this issue.
I think part of the problem is reducing complex issues to slogans, right? And sort of that Tumblr form of activism that doesn't really allow for analysis or nuance. Another problem is that we have systems that perpetuate abuse in like at every level. Right? We've talked about jails, but we could talk about practically any institution and have or identify similar issues. And then it's a matter of what's politically expedient, right? And who are the vulnerable or marginalized populations, and often there's more than one group to consider simultaneously. And how do we balance those rights, and who is advocating for who, and who is getting the short end of the stick because of what is easy, and you've sort of alluded to cowardice. I think we're in a time where people are susceptible to that. Like groupthink has always been an issue, I think, throughout the course of human history. And, this is all happening, of course, in a context where there are false equivalencies drawn between Canadian and American politics. And so people look south of the border and say, well, we don't want that happening here. And then policies are adopted that don't actually reflect the needs of Canadians. I am someone who is relatively new to I've been a woman all my life, but these are new issues, and it's also there's landmines, because people, if you don't adopt a certain talking point or position or view, there's this tendency to cast you as, well, the other or the enemy. And again, not exclusive to any issue or any end of the political spectrum. But it makes it hard to have good faith conversations. And what further complicates that is that there are people who aren't out to discuss in good faith and are actually intentionally spreading misinformation, disinformation, bigotry, and that muddies the waters, right? So it's just like this total cesspool where we try to extricate ourselves. And again, the guiding principles should be those of human rights. And if we can keep ourselves grounded in that, we have the best chance of success and dignity for everyone. But it doesn't always play out that way because that takes hard work.
Are you? You might not be. You might not agree with this, but I feel like activists and activists that represent certain issues do go through a period of time where the media and corporations and the general public at large will hoist upon them infallibility status. Like you cannot criticize certain things. Like, and so the example I would give was in 2020, uh, Black Lives Matter was like, I had never actually seen anything like that in my life, and there was such a fantastic upside to the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And one of the things I think is, first of all, Colin Kaepernick's taking a knee protest was probably the most impressive single person protest I had ever seen in my entire life. It was, I thought, heroic. And the reason why is because, no ambulances couldn't get to a hospital because people blocking bridges. There were no it wasn't violent. It wasn't needlessly kind of aggressive or anything like that. And it still raised the ire of racists, especially in the United States. But that's almost a good thing, but in a way, because it was one guy taking a knee, and I thought it was amazing. Um, and I want to pivot into the anti-hate network for a second after this, because I think it applies to them. When organizations are named, when you title an organization using a phrase that every sensible person should agree with, it does create an infallibility cloak over top of the organization. So Black Lives Matter, as a phrase, I fucking agree. Black Lives Matter. I would never say all lives matter because that misses the point entirely. It is a perfect, succinct phrase to spotlight the idea that minorities in the United States have for hundreds of years have been killed, raped, enslaved, discriminated against, mistreated, murdered by cops, da 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 da, and it's very succinct. So I put that in that pile over there. The organization Black Lives Matter, I think, should be open for criticism, even in 2020. But the media didn't agree. Corporations didn't agree. The public at large didn't agree. It was impossible to just be like, maybe the tactics of Black Lives Matter sometimes aren't perfect. Fuck you, racist. And it was really like that for a long time. The anti-hate network. How can you disagree with that? Are you not anti-hate? Well, of course I am. Antifa. What are you, pro-fascist? No, I'm not pro-fascist. I just don't like the organization. So we're seeing that a lot, I think. Organizations that call themselves something where you would have to be an asshole to disagree with the phrase, and it shields them often from criticisms from people that are just trying to figure out where they stand on the issue. Have you seen the same thing?
Yeah, no, I think that that's very much a thing that takes place. It's the same with the freedom movement. What are you, anti-freedom?
Right, exactly.
Right? Like, so these concepts that are legitimate and good and pure get sullied because people are imperfect. And because people are imperfect, it's necessary to have criticism and constructive criticism, right? That's not the same as tearing someone down or something just for the sake of it. But people mess up, and we have to be able to identify that and learn from it and do better. Instead, that becomes kind of the hill to die on, and it's unhelpful, to say the least. Yeah, I had something else.
Anti-hate.
No, it's just, yeah.
Yeah, it's gone back to like I find, and it's funny because I used to be the opposite, but I'm clearly not a communist or anything like that. I don't really know what I am. I just want people to be good to each other. But all these groups, for the most part, with the exception maybe of anti-hate because Bernie Farber does sort of have a profile in public or whatever, they're all no one can name the leaders. I don't know no one really knows the leader of Black Lives Matter. Is there a leader? No one really knows the leader of pro gender activists. Like if you were to put a figurehead up there, who would be that person? And
It's movements, right? So there's figures within movements, but it's not organizations per se. I totally like,
and do we need that? Because it's hard for people like myself. I've been trying. I had been trying for a while back before I had a podcast, and maybe right at the beginning when I had a podcast, to interview leaders from these activist group, and they largely just say no. And not just to me. You'd be hard pressed to go to YouTube right now and find national interviews of the leader of Black Lives Matter or the leader of the freedom movement or whatever. Because I think what they've realized is if they give the public a leader to crucify, that leader will be crucified and it will be a bad look for the organization. So instead, they basically freeze out the media. They don't give the public a leader to crucify. And then what seems to happen is that they become disorganized or corrupt. The Black Lives Matter leaders in the United States both ended up buying mansions in neighborhoods with the white supremacists that they hated, right? Like, and there was accusations of embezzlement of money or whatever. You know, like the story was out for a while and then it kind of went away. I don't know if anyone really cared, but you know, what do we need leaders? And is the downside that they are trying to avoid a reasonable position to have if you're an organization?
I think we need to not put people on pedestals. I think that's number one. We do need accountability, though. And the easiest route to accountability is to have sort of a person, right? And we're used to hierarchies in most institutions that we deal with. So I think that's the default assumption, that who's in charge here, that we can, put their feet to the fire. And that's not always conducive to movements that are grassroots or sort of going with the flow or the tide of the population. And the other thing is that it creates a landscape that's very fertile for certain types of personalities to step in. And there we go. Charismatic narcissists, right? Like that, it creates openings for them to develop their own followings, pursue their own ambitions, whether it's material interests or, they do it for
like that queen
right?
Medallo or whatever her name is.
Romana Didulo, yes. Yeah. Totally, right? I can list off dozens of them who I've encountered in the freedom movement and elsewhere. The other, just going back to your point about kind of the use of names to shield oneself from criticism, there's also like overcorrection, I think, that takes place. And that's probably why the media was so reluctant to put anyone under a magnifying glass, because media itself is complicit in a lot of the harm that Black Lives Matter, for example, was complaining about, right? And so flipping, and the same goes for corporations and how they sort of will appropriate causes and make these grand donations or, change their social media avatars in support of something, or have a float in a parade, right?
Yeah.
Performative gestures that really don't address the root issues and the ways that those organizations profit from and replicate patterns of oppression. And so it's easier to say, well, don't criticize these guys because that's just it shuts down the avenue of the real conversations. And all activism, I think, is plagued with this at the moment, where it gets co-opted by meaningless nonsense,
Self-serving.
and we get
Yeah.
further and further from the material issues that need to be addressed.
There might even be a cause and effect here because, again, the Black Lives Matter example is just the easiest one. But you know, they are treated as an organization, and again, I'm separating the organization from the issue they represent and the phrase that titles their organization. I am compartmentalizing those things. The issue they represent, I am full on in support of society creating equality of opportunity, in some cases equity. You know, I obviously I am for that, but maybe the lack of leader or the unwillingness for the media or the public at large or whatever well-meaning people to criticize these organizations lead to their corruption, like, you know, embezzling millions of dollars to buy mansions. Maybe if they had a leader and they had some sort of sense of accountability, because that's what falls away, right? Like, I don't see the Anti-Hate Network in Canada as an accountable organization. I feel like they probably imagine themselves with capes on, getting free federal money to go do a job that nobody criticizes them for, because if you do, you get fucking attacked. Mm-hmm. There's a problem here, and I think it's pretty obvious what the problem is. Do we have a solution? Can we even theorize a solution?
I don't know, man. It beats me. I kind of go like, the problem is that the only solutions that come to my mind put a lot of onus on individual people who aren't always that smart, right? Mm-hmm. Or have the bandwidth, because there's a million other things going on. So it's not realistic to expect someone to research, you know, a bunch of different issues and come to thoughtful conclusions on each of them and have the skill set to sort of do media analysis, and this is a legitimate source and this one is less trustworthy and this one, you know, is total garbage, we should actually believe the opposite. Like, we're still in the age of, oh, the CRA texted me and they want me to send them a gift card. Okay, I better go to the dollar, like, right? Yeah. So like,
I want my air ducts clean, but Jesus, you know.
Right. So my, like, the solution is for everyone to just kind of pull up their socks and think a little bit more, yeah. Right? Stop being lazy with your thinking. But that's perhaps unrealistic. So then it turns to, well, you know, who has power in situations and in what ways can they like wield that power to be beneficial and not self-serving, but actually forward thinking. And our whole political system is designed to not do that. Right? Like, our political leaders should be boring and pretty much like studious, yeah. And publicly inclined, right? Like, it's counterintuitive, like, to have charismatic, because it's a different skill set, right? And just our system isn't designed for that. None of our institutions are. So, like, in that sense, it's all kind of fucked up. But
there might be light at the end.
I don't know, I'm trying to find an optimistic thing to end on there. Well, but
that would, to me, tough medicine is optimistic, right? Like,
Jen says it. Everyone just stop being so, you know, dumb.
Yeah. There is there might be a light at the end of the tunnel. So, writing about these issues, and I'm contrarian, not for the sake of it. People think I am, because the environment that we live in right now, if I criticize issues that I agree with, I'm immediately identified as being like MAGA or something like that, right? So, but I think what people don't realize is that there is a silent majority, and I would probably use the word apathetic majority more so than silent, right? Like, but a big chunk of that middle who can see the kind of crazy on both sides are fucking afraid to say something. I take my beatings. You take your beatings when you criticize a side that, say, the media happens to agree with. And we take our licks. With you, the Anti-Hate Network. With me, it was Black Lives Matter. You agree that people shouldn't hate people, and I agree that that black people need more equality and equity, and we need to figure out how to make things fair in society and repair systemic racist institutions and all that. Like, we agree with the underpinnings of the issue, but people are afraid. Like, how many times have you gotten a DM or a text where it was like, "Hey, Caryma, I agreed with your criticism of such and such a person, but I don't want to say so publicly because I might get fired."
Totally. That happens all the
It
time.
happens all the time to people like us. And those are the people that need to stop being afraid, I think, to talk. Because at first they're going to get attacked. But then when more and more join them, I think people are going to realize, oh, maybe it isn't transphobic to say that male-bodied prisoners shouldn't be in women's prisons. Maybe there is a nuanced argument there that isn't anti-trans or anti-women or anything like that. Maybe criticizing Black Lives Matter leadership while still supporting the racial equality issue isn't a bad thing, because maybe then the leaders won't buy mansions and steal money. Like, I think that's the one thing that makes me kind of optimistic, is that those.
Okay, I can run with that. If we sort of double down on the importance of free expression and free association, and insist on that right, and reject the notion that we can take these mental shortcuts, and if you say that, like, it means that, like, no, just like, if we can insist on that, and if we can discourage people who are in that critical mass of not being pulled by either extreme, from being drawn to the extremes, because I've seen that happen, and that's the concerning part, right? The more people who get drawn to radicalism, the more volatile, and less stable, like, our society becomes. And the remedy for that, is expression. And in a social media world, it's challenging because half the time we don't know if we're interacting with a real person, or is this an AI bot, or is this the fifth account of one individual, right? Like, so that's hard to navigate, and it's always been the case that lies spread faster than truth. But expression is the cornerstone of democracy, and democracy is fragile, and we are facing these onslaughts that try to limit expression, including overbroad definitions of hate, that stifle meaningful, real discourse, and aren't hateful. So if we can push back against that, I think we have a shot.
I think we do too. Caryma Sa'd, thank you very much for joining us today on Blackballed. I always appreciate your insights and your time, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Caryma Sa'd, ladies and gentlemen, that was a good show. I love having her on because I never feel like I have to, like, edit myself. It's I wish sometimes I do wish I expressed, because we have a lot in common. What's really interesting is that the first time I appeared with Caryma, probably going back 2.5 years ago or 2 years ago or something like that, on the Dean Blundell show. I don't remember the show. It was pre-Beard James, so I'll never watch it. But we disagreed on something. I don't remember what it was, but we disagreed on something. And I remember walking away at the time thinking, oh, I'm not going to get along with this person. And then after 2 years of knowing her, I consider her a friend, and talking to her about issues like this, we don't agree on everything, but we are largely philosophically and morally aligned. And we also just have that extra part of ourselves that pays deference to nuance and the fact that some issues are a lot more complex than what you can put on a placard or emblazon on a foam finger if you're MAGA. And I think I think and she does it better than I do. And I think that people, I'm hoping that we get out of this, because if we don't, like, you see what's going on in the States, we are not that far off. We have accelerated our societal mimicking of the United States, especially over the last 5-6 years, to the point where I'm just like, I get worried about what Canada might be like in 20 years. You know, and both sides do it. And this false equivalency argument is so stupid. I'm fucking, no one, I don't care about about blame, equal blame. And I'm not doing that. I'm saying that one side has a unique set of characteristics that I find fucking awful, and the other side has a unique set of characteristics that I find awful. I don't care if one side is 60% worse than the other. It doesn't. It's such a stupid distraction. The people that don't plant a flag on either of those sides need to come together and start making sense so that those sides can either dwindle in numbers or somehow find a way to reform the people in their ranks so that less people get hurt. So that's all I got to say about that. Tomorrow's interview hasn't been confirmed yet, but we are back this Friday for Casual Friday, and we will see you then on Blackballed.
Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed.